Net zero, two simple words that strike fear into the heart of anyone, well, quite frankly, with a brain, who understands the implications of what the pursuit of net zero really means. Well, it seems that more and more people are waking up to the dangers of net zero, and we're seeing across the world, and especially in the UK, some very unexpected things happening. Here to explain it to us is Joanne Nova. To tell us, Joanne Nova, why did a little-known place called Uxbridge just become the focal point of this entire net zero debate?
Topher, it's fascinating what's going on in the UK at the moment, and Australians should understand where this is going. We've seen a phase change last month in the UK. I mean, feel the panic. When Boris Johnson quit, his seat was up for re-election, and the Conservatives were widely expected to lose it. And they did, in fact, I think, lose two other seats that day. But one young man, Steve Tuckwell, one of the youngest MPs in British Parliament at the moment, managed to pull off a surprising win, and it got attention everywhere. It was almost like the magic key, the kind of sacred the sacred spell was broken. He dumped his support he didn't mention the Tories. He instead ran almost exclusively against something called ULEZ, which Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has been putting in. Now, ULEZ stands for the Ultra Low Emissions Zone.
Sure.
Sadiq Khan set up the London zone to punish people bringing fossil fuel cars in. Instead of, it's to help encourage EVs.
Sure.
But he was going to expand this to the outer suburbs of London to punish people. And I think it was £12 a day. We're talking about an extraordinary punishment for people who were the truckies, the tradies, the average low-income household. They rely on their old fossil fuel cars. They can't afford a new EV, not like the inner city cafe latte set. So suddenly this became a very live election issue, and this Steve Tuckwell pulled it off. Well, it got the attention all across the UK. They have talked about, in the last weeks, it's been in the news again and again, not just because the Conservatives realised it, and they look like losing the next election. You know, the polling numbers are something like 28% for the Tories and 45% for the Labor Party.
Sure.
So the loss next year in the election in the UK looks complete. But suddenly the Conservatives were thrown a lifeline. And it was like, oh my gosh, the light went off. And they realised that if they run against these low emission zones and these local traffic networks, which I know you want to talk about, Topher, the idea that putting bollards is going to somehow be a winner in our lives and stop us using the road, that it might be a winner. What do you know? Who would have thought that people really like their cars?
Well, who would have thought that people want the government to serve them and not the other way around? We want the government to provide us with basic services and make our lives easier and not harder. Net zero is one example of that, but you just mentioned that these local traffic networks, these low traffic neighbourhoods, the same acronym is used for different expressions, are quite a fascinating thing. I've just got an article here saying that Mark Harper calls for a review of the unpopular LTN, low traffic neighbourhood zones. This is quite an extraordinary turnaround, exactly in the same way as what you're talking about with net zero. And it's come off the back of this Oxford University 15-minute city trial. And I've got some video here. I just want to stop and play this. This is the reality of what's been happening in parts of Oxford with this trial.
In the dead of night, a hooded figure removes a base plate for a bollard, then pours cement into the hole. The aim, to make it hard to install a new one. This footage, obtained exclusively by ITV Meridian, is one of hundreds of incidents of vandalism in Oxford's local traffic neighbourhoods.
Now, I love that they call it vandalism to be removing the bollards and to be trying to stop them from being able to be reinstalled. I would argue that it's vandalism to be taking roads that were open and paid for by the public and then spending public money to close them down. What does this say about what's happening and the public mood, I guess, towards all of these different emissions reductions ideas?
Well, this is it, Topher. The bizarre idea that, you know, after building all these roads so that people could conveniently go to A to B, that people in these kind of councils, especially Oxford Council and others, thought this idea of a 15-minute city was a winner. Instead of offering people better cycle paths or easier public transport or ways to get from A to B, they thought, look, won't it be a good idea if we just stick bollards in everywhere and stop people driving from A to B? They'll have to walk and they'll thank us for it.
Yeah.
Well, it's just bizarre because, of course, people hate it. It's killing businesses in some roads where traffic now can't travel past them. People don't want to walk 15 minutes in the rain to pick up their kids from school or visit the doctor, and they want to be able to drive their cars. And the weird thing is, this is something no one's talking about. If you have to drive out to a ring road, go on a highway and come back into a different 15-minute city, it's going to produce more emissions and take a lot longer and put more cars on the road. And the bizarre thing is, none of the Greens care. Does it matter if we produce more CO2? Whatever. It's
What I'm
the whole
loving
thing is so bizarre. And yes, people hate these bollards, and it's having all kinds of perverse effects. So for things like, there are little neighbourhoods now where plumbers don't want to go and they're charging extra to go in there, and electricians, because for them it takes a lot longer to get in and to get out. All the roads are now one way. They can't go here, they can't go there. And so it's costing people who live in these zones more time to get anywhere and more money to bring in a tradesman.
But what I'm absolutely loving is that in a very, very strange way, they've actually really brought people together. We've just been watching some footage there of there's someone who's gotten out of the car to help the driver get over the bollard. We saw earlier a pedestrian literally just volunteer to actually just hold that bollard down so that a car could get over it. They weren't even involved with the car at all. They just stopped for a moment as they were on the road walking. In a very perverse way, these ideas have become so bad that complete strangers are now cooperating and working with each other to undermine these ideas and to thwart the objectives of their own local council. This cuts back to what we were saying about net zero. The council and the government at all levels serving the people and the people's wishes. But now it seems as though they seem to believe that they're the boss and that we should just do what we're told.
Indeed, the cult of climate change has had no pushback. So they've come up with crazy ideas, mad ideas that depend on the public having no choice. In other words, the uni party voting left or right, you get the same thing either way. And it looks like this may have broken in the UK. Now, my big fear of this is, as we know in Australia, that can easily go underground. I mean, after Tony Abbott won his 90-seat landslide win based on Axe the carbon tax, we ended up with an emissions trading scheme in Australia because, Malcolm Turnbull came in and secretly brought in the safeguard mechanism. So what we saw was governments bringing in the laws the people voted against, like net zero itself, and conservative governments doing it. But in the UK, it's really quite a seismic shock that's gone on. And, to give you an idea of just how big this is, former Labor Party leader Tony Blair has come out warning the Labor, the current Keith Starmer and others, that perhaps they should back off just a little bit. Keith Starmer, the Labor opposition, even warned Sadiq Khan, the mayor, that maybe he should tread a little gently. And so the Labor Party is very quickly saying that if the Tories run against them based on net zero policies, they're so unpopular that the Tories might even pull off a win in the next election. And that's becoming part of the national discussion in the UK, is that the Conservatives might not lose the next election if they pick this topic up. And of course, this is like a sacred talisman just busted. And so it's very interesting to see what happens and whether the powers that be can bury this argument somehow and stop it being an election issue. And I don't think they can, because the big fear in the UK, because they are first past the post voting, unlike us, which, with our preferential system here, which normally I love. But what we're seeing in the UK is the big fear of both the Labor and the Tories is that their members will personally say, hey, I've got to save my own seat. I'm going to dump the policies of my main party and run against them. And we saw that in a couple of councils in the UK as well, where Labor members have split from their own party. So this is from the left. They've split from their own party, running against these things in order to maintain their own seat. And of course, once you split the vote in the UK, you're guaranteed to lose, because the first past the post system makes that happen. And we saw how much Nigel Farage achieved with his Brexit party, even though they didn't win many seats. So it is a different situation to Australia. UK, but fascinating to watch.
Yeah, look, it's quite an incredible moment in political history. We've seen West Australian politics completely turned on its head in the space of 2 months, thanks to the Aboriginal heritage laws that were a complete disaster, and now they've promised they're going to walk those back. We're watching Victorian politics be thrown into turmoil again because of Aboriginal heritage laws. I suspect that the Voice proposal, the Voice referendum, is going to prove to be a long-term disaster for the proponents of it, and may well mark a turning point in Australian federal politics. There, we may be looking at a turning point in UK politics. You've come on the Aussie Wire before and talked about how attitudes towards energy supply and even towards CO2 are changing throughout Europe. We might be watching before our very eyes an incredible turning point, one that I know you've been looking forward to for over 15 years of incredibly hard work on your blog, Joanne Nova. And
it is an extraordinary point, Topher. And just to finish up there, I think the most important thing here is that people are unaware of the costs that are involved with net zero. And once those costs come to the fore, like in the case of the UK with these traffic bollards with £12 costs of running a fossil fuel car, suddenly people are awake to the hidden cost of these policies. And that's got to be the thing that we push forward so that people become aware of just how expensive it is to change the global climate. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought, indeed. Well, Joanne Nova, thank you so much for joining us once again on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you.